Thank you. Good afternoon. Can you hear me in the back? First of all, I want to thank the organizers for having this design forum. It's really a privilege to be here to contribute to the discussion. I'd also like to thank the translators. You have a hard job and you're doing a great one, so thank you. And finally, the audience. Those of you who are here after lunch when we should all be taking a rest, I really appreciate it. So today, what Jinhee and I want to talk about, first we'll do short presentations, and then we'd like to have a dialogue along with the audience about architecture, architectural design. What now in these confusing times, how to do it, and for whom. So if we look at the profession of architecture, and when I speak of architecture, for those of you who are designers, please know that I'm including you in this. This is not something specific to a very narrow field, but affects all the design professions, maybe in slightly different ways, but in any case is relevant to all of us. Architecture is one of the oldest professions in the world, and it is undergoing great change in these days. If we look at the lone heroes who practice architecture, to starchitects, to boutique firms or alternative forms of practice, there's a lot of pressure being exerted on the profession and trying to make it, pushing it to change in different directions. Now, architects have always grappled with issues of identity, what are their professional roles, and how to communicate these to the public. But if we add to this crisis of roles a few facts, we see that perhaps architects have an even more difficult task nowadays. In an article written back in 2000, Ellen Durham Jones was referring to the irrelevance of architects. Now, she was talking about the United States and especially the suburban parts of the country, but she said and explained that 75% of all buildings in the United States are not designed by architects. So just a small minority are. If we add to this fact information about informal settlements, these are settlements where, that are made by people, usually using materials that are close at hand. They're people often in precarious situations that need shelter very quickly, and they use what is available. And usually these places lack basic necessities. It's about 25% of the world's population lives in informal settlements, and this is increasing. And it's increasing because of pressure to move into cities, but especially because of natural disasters and man-made disasters, such as war, immigration, people being forced to move because of unsaleable conditions in their home countries. And then another part of architecture that is made without architects is something probably more positive, which is vernacular architecture. And vernacular architecture are those wonderful buildings that rise up from a culture, from tradition. They're made by local craftsmen and normal people who take into account histories of understanding about how patterns of settlement were in certain places, the climate, materials, and local crafts. So that may be good, but again, it's indicating to us that the role of architects and designers as we are understanding it here is not something that pertains to 100% of the buildings in our environment, but to a minority of buildings, and is becoming smaller and smaller. Now, if we add to that how the public sees architects and designers and their role. This is an article that appeared in a blog, but it was talking about a study that was done, that the public doesn't really trust architects, the public and the clients. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that they don't really understand what are the capabilities, what is the role of the architect. And this misunderstanding or miscommunication is also one of the factors that is making it more and more difficult for architects to take their full position in society. Now, if we go back to a book written by Ayn Rand and the film that was made from it, this is just an example of explaining further that confusion about the role or roles of architects. This is a book that deals with power, the relationship of architect to builder, architect to client, to society, how the architect in this case sees himself. And there's also other undercurrents about different romantic relationships and power. But it's just an example that in the past we saw, or many people saw the architect as that great author, that singular hero who was going to make skyscrapers. But even in the book by Ayn Rand, The Fountainhead, that's not such a direct and easy story. Now, Spiro Kostof, in the 70s, the fine academic architectural critic, edited this book called The Architect. And in that book, he attempted through a series of articles written by other authors to trace the development of the profession of architect. And he wrote this in 1977, and really in an English language book prior to that was only written in 1927. So there was a 50-year gap before people started to look at what is this role of an architect, what does this profession mean? And if you'll allow me, I'll just quote briefly what he said. He said, "This is what architects are, conceivers of buildings. What they do is design, what they do is supply images for a new structure so that it can be put up. An architect does not initiate buildings nor necessarily take part in its physical construction. The architect is a mediator between the client or patron and the workforce or the builder." Well, that's a pretty definite but limiting role of what the capability of an architect or designer could be. And again, we see another, this was more recent, and I believe this was in Archinet, a blog called, it was a dialogue about the state of the profession. And they said that architecture and firms can be divided basically into two camps. Either the design firms, where the focus is on the great design, the product, the building, or all service firms, where they try to do everything. And if we read this, we can also infer from this that design firms, the heroic designer, is positive, and those firms that try to do other things, control the costs, or maybe project management, maybe develop a program, they do the soft things too. And in some ways, that's not seen as so positive. Now, if we look at this open letter that was written several years ago by Annie Choi, she is not an architect, but had a lot of friends who were architects, you can see what she, as a representative of the public, thought about architecture. And designers, you're probably in the same boat. You, along with architects, are those people who work many, many hours a week. And as she says, 60, 80 hours a week, and yet you're always poor. So a criticism of the honorarium that architects and designers can receive. And she also is inferring that you're proud of the fact that you work so much and don't have a life outside of the office. And then finally, in her last paragraph of the letter, she's poking fun at architects and designers really for taking themselves too seriously and thinking that they are the center of the universe, even though in this case, she says that some talk about a European architect you've never met who designed a building you'll never see because you're too busy even to go and visit that. She was referring to Rem Koolhaas in this paragraph. So on one hand, we have the public misunderstanding architecture, we have the profession itself, looking inward and criticizing or trying to analyze and give value to certain aspects of the profession. But then we also have some more objective forces at work. And technology, of course, in all professions in the past few decades, not so many, has been exerting great influence. And in the case of architecture, Jinhee and I will talk a little bit more about this, and I hope you will as well, because technology can be positive, negative. It depends on how we construe it, of course, but it could be tools for design, presentation, something that's used in the process of design. It's also a way of communicating and making more transparent the plans and drawings that are created and sharing those and having input from collaborators, engineers, and other types of professionals. And then finally, technology, that instant ability to communicate with any place in the world is something that allows us to break down the boundaries of geography and work in other countries, other cities, and collaborate across geographic boundaries. Rapid urbanization, of course, has been something that has put great pressure on architectural professions and architects. This idea that you must design and build quicker and quicker, that there are a lot of needs that must be met instantaneously. And of course, on one hand, we have technology going quicker and quicker, much faster paced, but yet our building and construction and the process of design are slow. I would say architecture is a slow profession, and rightly so. We can't invent things and put them up overnight. It takes time, and especially because those buildings will be lasting for decades and sometimes centuries. I think the other thing that rapid urbanization reminds us is that architects and designers, along with many others, now must be focused on livability of cities. Instead of looking at individual discrete buildings, they have to look at the overall environment, the context they are creating, not just the building, but all the other spaces, and sometimes spaces which are not designed. And that contributes to making a city successful and healthy for its residents or not. And finally, a third area of pressure on architecture and design is globalization. Now, by globalization, there are different aspects to it. Of course, if we think of environmental problems, such as global warming, we remember that when we build nowadays, it's not just for the specific community, it's not just keeping in mind the immediate context, but we also have to remember the global context and that impact on the global footprint and the use of resources. Especially when we think global, We also think of natural disasters and man-made disasters. That again is a pressure that's asking architects and architecture and designers to respond. And then finally, we're just thinking global. It allows us to share information, to share research. It has that ability to connect us with other colleagues and professionals from around the world to take advantage of new ideas, new materials, and the knowledge that we have. Now, if we look at the evolution of offices of architecture and design, here's one back from early mid-20th century. Here's one from a little bit later in the 70s. Don't they look similar? And here's one from now. Basically, there are elements of the practice of architecture that haven't evolved in spite of all the pressures that the field is feeling from the outside. Yes, there are changes, computers, but we still do things in some of the same ways that we always have. And in terms of education, when students were studying with Mies van der Rohe at IIT back in the 40s, 50s, 60s in Chicago, and how we're still teaching today, even though we have computers, or when we have design crits. There's slight evolution, but it's not always as huge as we might think. And we'll come back to this later, I think, Jinhee and I, to talk a little bit about the design crit, which is an enormously positive and empowering way of learning through the design studio. But there are still some flaws with it in terms of making it totally relevant for today's students. Now, if we look at something close to my heart, which is the Pritzker Prize, we can also see that the purpose of the prize, when it was established in 1979, has remained the same, and here we are 41 years later, and it still is the same, that the prize is granted to a living architect or architects by looking at their built work and analyzing and rewarding the art of architecture on one hand, or quality of architecture, and on the other hand, to a contribution to humanity. And I would say that I think that the Pritzker jury has evolved in some ways, interpreting what is architecture and what is the art of architecture, but more than that, they've evolved in the service to humanity and how architecture might be practiced. Philip Johnson, of course, was the first winner, and he represents that model of the lone hero, holding his building as the creator. And the two most recent winners, three architects from Catalonian area of Spain, Rafael Aranda, Carme Pigem, Ramon Vilalta in 2017, or Balkrishna Doshi in 2018, reflect a new way of practicing architecture. The three together in the creative process, or we see Doshi sitting in front of his building in Ahmedabad, the School of Architecture, in the role of a teacher, someone to share his ideas and experience, and that becomes important in terms of service to humanity. Oops, sorry. Now, the architecture profession, when we look at architecture schools, they're pretty much equal in terms of men and women who are studying, and even in schools like my own, i.e. School of Architecture and Design, we have more women than men students, and the women usually are more successful in their academic career in general than men, not just at my school, but in general. They seem to get better grades. They go into work and after college. But what happens? Well, in a few years, some of them drop out, some of them look for other professions, some of them look for jobs that are more compatible with the lifestyle that they're hoping for. And then in about 10 years later, 10, 15 years, many women drop out. And therefore, although they've invested all that time and money in education, they don't put it to good use. They can't. And we can talk about why that is. There's several factors, and certainly discrimination is one of them. So what next with these pressures, with changes in society? Well, my own personal opinion is that I think that architecture has to expand its role. Not only expand it, but there has to be acceptance for more roles in the field of architecture. And there have to be changes in the profession. Some of those changes are structural changes, and other changes are the way we communicate to the public and the way the public understands us. And let me just give you a few examples of, I think, some firms, by no means not all, but just a few examples to show that critical practices or firms that are looking at architecture and practicing in a different way, certainly a different way than firms did 50 or 100 years ago. Now, these firms are by no means purists in their approach. Sometimes they are hybrid ways of approaching architecture, taking things from traditional architecture and reinventing it and moving forward. But here is a firm from London, Assemble, and you may know them or have heard of them. They won the Turner Prize in 2015. Now, the Turner Prize is usually given to artists, but this time, for the first time in its history, it was given to this young, collective group of architects, but they weren't licensed architects. They were designers, people who had studied architecture. And they did a lot of their work, and they do a lot of their work in direct engagement with the public. They don't wait for a client to come to them, but they instigate or they start projects on their own. They work in the communities, and they often use recycled materials. They often try to recycle buildings, and really they're quite a loosely joined together collaborative. So Assemble is one way that I think that they're practicing architecture in a critical sense. Another one, Elemental, Alejandro Aravena leads this firm in Santiago de Chile. And I think his is a critical practice because he has inserted himself into the political arena. His idea of creating half a house, we can't say he was the inventor of it, but he was the first person in the last decades who has been successful at getting this implemented, not only in his home country of Chile, but in different Latin American countries. And as I'm sure you all know, the idea is that here the architect contributes to the project what is highly professional and only the professional architect can, which would be the structure, the plumbing, the skeleton of the house, and building half of a house in quality materials and then making it ready so that the residents can finish it. They can add the paint, add the ceramic tiles, and when they're ready, invest in the house and make it even larger. The idea of this is that housing is more than shelter. It is an investment, and then the residents can use it as collateral against future businesses or loans so that they may be able to not only live in the house, but use it as a way of advancement. Mass Design from Boston is organized as a not-for-profit firm. This means that for them, 25% of the work they do in the office is pro bono. It is for clients who are not able to pay for architecture. And then they do 75% of their work, which is more in the traditional path. And that way, they're not trying to make money, but they're trying to be able to have a decent living for their staff, but they're organized as a not-for-profit company. Shigeru Ban is somehow similar to this, but he is someone who does a lot of traditional architecture, and that architecture then allows him an economic support in his office to be able to undertake research, as he did in the case of paper tube buildings, or undertake projects in areas that have suffered natural disasters. Shop is a firm, and you can see in their book called Out of Practice. Shop is a firm in New York City that, yes, they practice architecture at times in a traditional way, but I think they're a critical practice because they have established other companies as well. The founders had studied either finance or technology and then studied architecture. So it was only logical when they are faced with a situation, or when they were faced with a situation of difficulty in having a construction company undertake a project, in this case, a stadium in Brooklyn. They designed the method of construction, which has become a construction company. They also are developing apps by telephone, digital apps, so that anyone can understand the zoning laws in Manhattan, and when you see a site that's empty, you can put it in your phone and it will tell you how many square feet you can build, how tall the building can be, what is the zoning. You don't need a lawyer and to go through 500 pages of zoning laws to interpret it, but rather this architectural practice has developed the platform to be able to do that. And then finally, another firm from the Netherlands, Ben van Berkel and Caroline Boss, who formed UN Studio. They have an interesting point of view, which is that the knowledge that architects develop over the course of undertaking a project is something that has great value, and that this knowledge should be able to be transmitted and also sold rather than just having to wait for another project. Let me give you an example. If you're a firm and you design, let's say, a large airport, well, how many airports can you design in the lifetime of your firm? 1 or 2? But the enormous amount of effort that you put into the first project to really understand that, all that knowledge that comes together shouldn't just sit in your office. You should be able then to use it consulting and assisting others who could benefit by the learning that you've undertaken. So they see architects not only doing traditional work, but also as these great repositories of knowledge, being able to share it. So for me, I think that the way of the future are critical design firms. There are many, many models of this. And I think the question of those firms is not just how do we do architecture, how do we do design, but it's also always asking the question, the underlying question is, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Thank you very much.
박진희 대표님 큰 박수로 무대로 모시겠습니다.
you. Can you hear me? It's an honor to be here. Honor to have this great opportunity to have a conversation with Martha, and later on I'd like to invite the speaker and the practitioner here, and of course the audience to our conversations. For today, I'm going to talk about our project as one of the sample example of the Martha talked about as a alternative the design business model that we are trying to figure out throughout our project. So we have an office in New York and Seoul. That we work separately and together in order to gain the local knowledge and in order to maximize the time differences, and also to build a broader relationship that enable us to get these projects throughout the world. Even if our office is very small, this reaching out to this different market was great benefit for us to keep our office going, regardless the economical issues or political issues. So the idea of microurbanism is that the themes that we've been working on quite some time. So the idea of the microurbanism is about figuring out the most essential elements that go to micro level, so that we can have set up the system that can be scalable application in the urban context, and depending on it can be very small, but it can be very big also. So one of this project that we did is this is interior design space in Chelsea, New York, and it's the sort of unique situation where the three family approached us to design the space that they can share. So they actually came to us with the plan and with the 6 rooms. So each family, they said, oh, we need at least 2 rooms for the family. But then as you can see in the plan, that this is an amazing space with a great view. And then in order to put those 6 rooms, it covers the whole vista. And also the experience they have actually is very like one small room instead of this huge, nice, grand the piece of flat that they bought. So what we suggested is this space that can be reconfigurable with the curtain and sliding doors, so they can find their own the most optimized space. So here, what we do is that when we get the commission, that we try to have a research. So that goes beyond the client's request. So we take the clients as a sample of this social phenomenon. So here is so we mapped out the potential the user for this kind of project, this kind of a space that different type of people, they all have this nomad the lifestyle. The Manhattan, it looks very big and dense and crowded, but if we look at the occupancy ratio, so it's actually quite low. So if we design something that they can be reconfigurable and they can share, then we can actually increase the occupancy ratio. So if we apply this into the bigger scale to city level, this is how you perceive the big city. This is the actual occupancy. And then if we can densify this occupancy ratio, then we have all of a sudden this much of empty space for the public use. So this is a sort of the thinking behind of how we came up with this idea of, so this is although the project itself is small, but we try to address the bigger urban issues. So there's the great view to Empire State Building, through this diagonal wall that they can have this view to the major area, and each member can store their belongings, and then that becomes the part of the environment. So they can have their the sense of ownership because they can see their stuff there. Through this, the mesh curtain that you can define the space and also with a very simple adjustment of lighting. It can be the opaque. If it lit outside, if you lit inside, then it becomes transparent. So this multi-function that we are trying to come up is very, very important. So multifunction with the one space or one material, that is a very important. And even the shelving is one of the idea that that enhance this kind of living. And this one is the 8 towers, and we were part of the all those 100. You may know the Ai Weiwei there. He invited 100 architects to build this villa in the place called Ordos in Inner Mongolia. And as you can see, there was a site. So there's no such a thing as a context. We are, all 100 architects got together. There's nothing to respond to other than just a vast of sand. There's no street, and then you can see there's those trees getting planted. So finally, there's 100 the scheme, and the brief was very simple. There's a 36 room that we had to include, and then everything else is very vague, and there's nothing. So what we can respond to this kind of a condition is the basic elements, which is the program. So we identify the function of room, and then stack the rooms to make 8 towers. So we sort of made an 8-tower consciously because 8 is the lucky number in Chinese culture. So what that does is that each tower, which is one function that usually needs to be used in certain time of day. So the energy of the tower can be on and off, depending on the use, depending on the time of the day. So this is the sort of a cluster of towers that the works is one house. And each room has the one floor, have a nice the view, and to have a natural ventilation, natural light, things like that. So for today, I'm gonna talk about more about the context of our project rather than the design specific. I'd like to show some images. So there's a view to to the sky instead of the view to the neighbor. This also allows the even very, very private program like bathroom can have a spectacular view without hurting the privacy. The next one is the project that we actually built in Korea, Haeri. So the brief was that it was a competition, and the client asked for the flexible space for the exhibition. So usually when people say flexible space, it's usually one big space, and later on the curator can sort of put this partition for the exhibition. And our approach was a little bit different. Our approach is why don't we then provide the many very specific rooms. The specific rooms with the specific proportion and specific lighting conditions, so that the curator can find the most optimized space. The Haeri, as you know, is near the borderline to North Korea. So there is a very the strict regulation in terms of maximum building height, and so it looks very calm and peaceful, but there's an underlying tension. And in order to create this, the space with one big open space, what you get is usually is this pancake space, that the upper part, that the homogeneous space. Then what we propose is with the compact arrangement of the variety of space, we get this diverse experience. Where through the viewing circulation, there's a constant alteration from the very open space and the very condensed space. So the viewing experience is very, very dynamic. And we are trying to fight with this idea of museum headache, which is when you go to museum, after a while you get the headache because of it's so controlled space. So every part of space can be used as exhibition space. Even the fire stairs can become the facade and become a nice exhibition space. So when you enter, that you go through this very condensed entry, and then you have all of a sudden it's a triple height exhibition space through the stairs. And each room we name differently. So it's the different, we call the box. So there's a hanging box, sitting box, and there's a constant alteration of this very controlled exhibition space and open space that you can actually get the engagement to the nature. And there's also space for this the performance. So the owner can have this performance because owner also own the museum musical company. For this project, after we built this project, because the owner, this was his first gallery, so he didn't have any reputation as a gallery. So he admitted that he's not going to make much profit by running a gallery. So what he did was that he rented this space for this shooting commercial film or the drama, and it became really popular. So There's so many. The drama was shoot in here, and now they are actually making enough profit to promote this, to support other artists. So this is the sort of the example of how the function of the room, a function of the space can be transformed into something else. And because of this space is for exhibition space, we put a lot of consideration of this, the right lighting condition. So it's a perfect, actually, space for this shooting film. That's why it became popular. The environmental concern is also very important. And the free pattern on the outside that works with the environmental change, the seasonal changes, and the daily changes also. That, of course, we want to, the pattern is not just the aesthetic elements, but also function to reduce the heat gain. So we built this script to figure out this pattern. And the other the aspect of our concern is how we can make the sustainable project. And this environmental concern was one of the elements actually that we use to design the building or elements. So this is from our collaborator. So unlike what other people usually think, there's rather than the renewable material or the physical intervention, actually behavior changes the effect the carbon footprint more. So when we think about building a city, there's this hard infrastructure that we usually think, and this soft infrastructure, which is the information or data or security network, those are becoming more and more important. And then how we can link this together to build the higher urban performance was the concern. So through this idea that we build this the lighting installation, which is mainly the visualization of the data that we collect from the security camera. So the security camera that sense the circulation of the passerby and also the movement of the weather. To map out the path from the main road to this lake, which is usually underutilized. So we made this the idea of this the cloud that reflects amplifies the people's the movement and then amplifies the weather change. This project actually we did it originally for the different location in the Providence Plaza in Rhode Island in US. And this is the one of the example that we lost that competition, but we put those in our website, and the client of this white block gallery actually dig down. We didn't show, but he actually dig down the website, and then he say that looks great, and why don't we build here? And then we finally got it built, and listen. So it works with the people. It tracks, it follows people, and that it emits a certain light. And when people gather together, it changes the intensity of the light and intensity of sound, so that promotes the people's the interaction. So instead of having this security camera and have the scary sign to control, this is through the stimulation that the people make it is a way to make people use this space.
Dance in sequence, climate, silence, mountains without science, Einstein infinity equations, orbit infinity.
So it reacts to the weather. So bring out the people's awareness of the weather. And then again, the research becomes the very big part of our practice, and we are conscious about this social change. So we looked at this the family change for this housing, micro housing that we built recently. So we look at this nuclear family, and by the time 2035, this is data for the Korea. It takes up less than 10%. And we expect it's all this different kind of family, and different type, different size. So then what we can do with this. And we also looked at the size of family also. So up to a certain age, you live with your parents or you're single, you get married. Traditionally, family gets bigger and bigger as you get older. But these days, the family, you get bigger when you get married, and then you get kids, bigger. Then you get divorced, smaller, and you remarried, bigger, and then the kids actually goes through that cycle again. So this fluctuation, and then also the longer life cycle, and this fluctuation of the family size, it becomes also the problem. So we got this opportunity of the looking at these issues. So this residential, the fabric that you can see is very typical. We have only two options in Seoul, that either living in an apartment or this the family, the smaller low-rise building. So those setup is very strict, very rigid. It doesn't respond to the constant change of the family and people's lifestyle. So we've finally got this the great opportunity to what we can do with this social change. But at the same time, like when we look at this, the minimum elements of the living space, and we decide to go with a very, very small, which is 12 square meter. So, but then our question was, it's not about this making things micro, but the question is, when we make things micro, then what we can do more was the question. The other question that we had was how we then bring all this idea into the consideration and bring this idea into realization of this because of the client is always struggle with bringing funding, how to make the project profitable. So we brainstorm with them and help them, and then so the demolition part becomes the part of our project. So then they can bring in this the funding from art, which is not so much of economical benefit, but is that brought in a lot of attention in this limited spot. So for the later, the selling point is the better. So when the unit was very very small, but then we put the unit into a certain the environment, so and then in a specific relationship. So even if the unit is the same, depending on the location, depending on the surrounding that we created, it can work different. So for instance, there's the green thumb, which is this rectangular unit. They can green thumb is the people that like to grow things. So the user can take advantage of this nice balcony with the very same unit, the film critic on the right side that they can enjoy big screen through the window. So we really thought about this, how even if the space is very small, how their behavior can go beyond their physical boundary. And also we did this very small development, small and dense development, even very the unit that goes deep into this the fabric can have a nice view through this stairs. So there's as you can see, you can see directly to the neighbor building. Usually what happens is the people put the window, but then later on they cover up to get this privacy. So what we did is we built a void inside of the building so that all the window and the protected view can happen. So it's one of the unit is combined unit. There's the idea of when we make this the unit very very small, then we can actually add more to have the bigger unit. So the variation, it can be endless. It's one of the sample, the 12 square meter units that shows the whole activity. And now we are trying to incorporate the smart technology into this to even more, make the space even more efficient. That we are working with one of this home appliance company that we looked at the home appliance, the technology of the appliance. The idea behind of that is that when we build this housing, then until the people move in and then install the appliance, the space is not usable. So if you look at, from the beginning of the building, construction of building, all the way up to the installation of the home appliance, actually there's a lot of redundancy that we can figure out. So how we can actually use the current technology, current and future technology they already have, and they can actually transform the living space that we have a lot of the obstacles. So this is the sort of a typical setup, and we can actually create this the flexible space. They can different program can happen with the optimized the thermal, lighting, and the audio conditions. So even if you are with the same room, that two different people can do their own thing without the physical barrier. So this also promotes this people's interaction, because you can be in the same room, but then you can still have a certain interaction. So in this case, maybe there will be visual interaction, but then each location can function for a different purpose. So what kind of impact that we can create with this kind of operation? That's our big question. Going back to the micro-housing, so from the ground, you can go down to the cafe / the exhibition space, and in the cafe, can be approached by this stairs, and the stair that works as the seating during the cafe during the day, and the seating for this performance during the night. So even though this space is very small, it can be functioned multiple different ways, and function in extended hours, so that the clients actually can have the economical benefit here, so that they can put the more investment within in the same space. There's the gallery on the second floor. So there's different program of a very small scalable development, but different program of the cultural program, commercial program, residential program that works. It creates the sort of urban, small city conditions. We studied a lot of this surrounding to come up with this the needs in the extra program that the existing building cannot fulfill, and we sort of incorporate that into this the screen. So the second screen actually can serve a lot of different the functional needs. And we convinced the client that this double skin, so people usually get scared, but actually it's not because of this is a sort of elements they need to add anyway. But we presented as the sort of incoherent system. So that creates also different life of this building. So depending on the lighting condition, the building looks very different. And we apply this into this the bigger scale of development. After we got it built, we got the call from the developer in Malaysia. So it's much bigger scale. It's a 1,700 unit that we had to design. So, but with this setup, we can actually create this variety of the unit without making the huge alteration of this the structural system. So we kept it very simple. The 3-meter base system they asked us to do. And then we can actually configure, we can make this all different kind of the type of unit. And what it does is that usually when this big development happens, it takes the time to finish. And when they started the project, they do market research. But the market research, by the time they finish the project, actually is already too old. So what this system does is that they, through this, the flexible reconfiguration of a system, that they can actually change the proportion of different type of units in the last minute, which the client saw as a great benefit. And then that was the sort of overall idea of the 1700 unit. Again, the climate consideration is very, very important. So we work with this very well-known engineer, Transola, and to come up with find the most optimized comfort level and the form of the space. Again, we wanted to incorporate that as a part of a design, and the structural limitation, as they wanted to use their conventional method, which is the reinforcement concrete. So with this slight curve that we create, through that we could have many different the curved corner and corner view and shading because of their location. The sun is actually right above their head, so it's even a little bit of a curve actually create the shade. And then through the void space, we can have a ventilation. So this is the environmental issue, environmental concern. It becomes a part of the design elements, design tool that we kept on trying to incorporate. And of course, the name of this project actually is a Great Wall. And the client in their Chinese culture, they really like that name. It's marketable, and that all is so we made it the world's longest corridor. They can actually use as exercise path. So this the effort is outside of the usual conventional architect's role, but we are willing to do that. So this consideration, the usually convince the client that they feel like the architects know understand their needs. So from there, we can have actually the more smooth, collaborative, the working process with them. So this is my last slide that I will end, and I'd like to have a discussion of Martha. I'd like to invite Martha back to the stage, and then talk about this new practice model. Thank you.